This is a fine apple.
The carrots are sweet today.
When most of us think of medieval food, the images that come to mind are often grim. Simple bread, watery stew, and a meager existence fueled by the barest of rations. It's easy to imagine that the people of the past lived on bland, tasteless meals with little understanding of flavor or nutrition. But this is a far cry from the reality of medieval diets. In fact, the kitchens of medieval Europe were bustling with an array of ingredients, spices, and cooking techniques that would surprise anyone familiar with today's mass-produced, convenience-driven food culture. Contrast the sterile, predictable aisles of modern supermarkets, stocked with genetically modified, processed foods designed for easy consumption, with the resourceful systems that medieval cooks developed to source and preserve food. In a time where nothing went to waste, the food systems of the past were deeply interconnected with nature. Medieval people were skilled foragers, hunters, and gardeners, tapping into a vast array of wild plants, game, and local crops that not only sustained them, but also reflected an intimate relationship with their environment. These meals weren't just sustenance, they were a manifestation of survival, creativity, and an intricate understanding of how to thrive without the luxuries we take for granted today. As we sit in our climate-controlled kitchens, we forget how much knowledge once lived in the hands of the common folk, their culinary wisdom passed down through generations, shaping what we now consider the roots of true self-sufficiency. As we delve into the forgotten foods of the medieval world, we'll uncover the surprising variety and ingenuity of these ancient meals. These dishes, many of which have been lost to time, might just hold the key to rethinking how we approach food, sustainability, and even survival in the modern world.
Honey, the sweet survival resource. Honey, in its golden simplicity, was far more than just a sweet treat for medieval people. In an age without refrigeration or advanced preservation method, it stood as a vital resource, one that transcended its role as a mere sweetener. Imagine a time when the threat of hunger loomed at every corner, when the harvest could fail and winters stretched on forever. In this context, honey was a lifeline. It was used to preserve fruits, vegetables, and even meats, offering a natural alternative to the chemical-laden preservatives of today. It could be stored for years, maintaining its sweetness and medicinal potency without spoiling. But honey wasn't just about survival. It was an essential part of health and healing. Medieval doctors and apothecaries used it to treat wounds, burn injuries, and even respiratory illnesses. Its antibacterial properties were well known long before modern science confirmed its potency. Honey was applied as a salve, mixed into remedies, and even consumed to fight off infections. It was nature's multi-purpose gift, a sweet, versatile substance that could nourish the body and heal it. Today, we live in a world where our food is often stripped of its natural integrity, replaced by synthetic alternatives that promise convenience but fall short of offering any real sustenance or resilience. Modern sugars and artificial sweeteners are far from the ancient wisdom of honey, often contributing to the fragile, chemically dependent food systems that dominate our lives. In an era of rising food insecurity, honey reminds us of a simpler, more sustainable approach to nourishment. It's a resource that, when rediscovered, has the power to not only sustain us physically, but offer a profound connection to the earth and its enduring gifts. The power of pottage. In medieval kitchens, pottage was the heart and soul of daily life, a thick, hearty stew that was far more than just a simple meal. For centuries, this humble dish sustained the masses, from peasants to royalty, each pot brimming with a wealth of local foraged ingredients. Its diversity was astounding. Depending on the season and available resources, pottage could include anything from barley, peas, and beans to wild herbs, mushrooms, or meat. In fact, some of the most elaborate versions were rich with game, such as venison or wild boar, making them a feast fit for kings. But regardless of the ingredients, the foundation remained the same, a dish built on simplicity, resourcefulness, and sustainability. Pottage was an embodiment of medieval ingenuity. It wasn't just about sustenance, it was about making the most of what nature offered. Vegetables, grains, and herbs were gathered from local gardens or the wild, ensuring that nothing went to waste. In a time where food scarcity was an ever-present threat, pottage was a meal that could be endlessly adapted. It was a fusion of necessity and creativity, with every cook adding their own touch to the recipe, based on what was available or in season. In stark contrast, today's food systems are largely driven by mass production and global supply chains that leave us increasingly disconnected from the land and its cycles. Our meals are often overly processed, packaged in plastic, and shipped across the world, draining resources and leaving a significant environmental footprint. The convenience of modern food comes at the cost of nutritional value and sustainability. Pottage, however, offers us a different model, one rooted in sustainability, self-sufficiency, and respect for the land. These ancient stews remind us that there is a way to nourish ourselves without relying on industrialized systems. The practice of foraging, growing, and cooking with local, seasonal ingredients may hold the key to a more sustainable and resilient future. As we reflect on pottage, we might ask ourselves, what can we learn from these ancient meals, and how can we apply them to the challenges of our own time?
The surprising use of acorn. Acorns, often overlooked today, were once a staple food source in medieval Europe, playing a crucial role in the survival of many communities. In a time when grain harvests could be unpredictable and livestock sparse, the oak tree's humble acorns became an essential survival food, one that was far more versatile than we might expect. The preparation of acorns for consumption is an art largely forgotten by modern society, yet it was a skill vital to medieval life. Acorns could be ground into flour, used to make bread, porridge, and even soup. In some regions, they were boiled down into acorn milk, providing a valuable dairy alternative, especially for those with limited access to livestock. But the preparation of acorns wasn't as simple as picking them off the ground. Acorns are naturally bitter due to their high tannin content, which can make them toxic if consumed in large quantities. To make them edible, medieval people had to carefully leach out these tannins through a process of soaking, rinsing, and drying. This labor-intensive method was an example of the resourcefulness required to make the most of nature's bounty. Acorns weren't just food, they were a symbol of resilience, demonstrating the ability to turn what seems like an unremarkable natural resource into a reliable source of nutrition. Contrast this with today's world, where for foraged, sustainable foods like acorns have been largely forgotten. Modern diets are dominated by highly processed foods, many of which are stripped of nutritional value and rely heavily on industrial agriculture. Our disconnection from nature and the lost knowledge of how to survive off the land has made us more dependent on global food systems that often harm the environment and our health. Acorns, though once a symbol of survival and sustenance, are now a distant memory. But in the face of growing environmental challenges and food insecurity, there's power in rediscovering these ancient methods. The art of preparing acorns invites us to rethink our reliance on modern food systems and empowers us to reconnect with the earth's bounty. The forgotten knowledge of foraging and preparing acorns reminds us that resilience is rooted not just in what we have, but in how we use what we can find.
Medieval wild game. In medieval Europe, wild game was more than just food. It was a symbol of status and privilege. Hunting was a skill reserved for the elite, and the pursuit of animals like venison, wild boar, and even bears was a mark of nobility. The royal courts and wealthy landowners maintained vast hunting grounds where they would track and kill game for both sustenance and sport. These hunts were not just about putting food on the table. They were elaborate affairs, steeped in ritual and a clear display of power. Wild game, in its richness and variety, became synonymous with luxury, a food reserved for the privileged few who could afford such an indulgence. Yet, for the majority of medieval people, wild game was more than just a rare delicacy. It was an essential part of survival. For peasants living on the fringes of the feudal system, hunting allowed them to supplement their diets with valuable animal protein, something that could make the difference between life and death during harsh winters or poor harvests. In a world where every meal mattered, the capture of wild game was a resource that could be traded, preserved, and used to ensure a family's survival. Today, the concept of wild game as a luxury has shifted. With the rise of industrial farming, domesticated animals have become the standard source of meat, and wild game is often viewed as a rare, niche item, one that can only be found in high-end restaurants or specialty shops. This shift not only marks a loss of tradition, but also reflects the growing detachment between modern society and the natural world. In many ways, we have come to see wild meat as something exotic, rather than an integral part of sustainable food systems. However, as we face growing concerns over factory farming and the environmental toll of mass meat production, there is a rising interest in wild game as a more ethical, sustainable alternative. The hunting of wild animals, when done responsibly, mirrors the ideals of sustainability and a return to natural food sources. It challenges us to reconsider our relationship with the animals we consume and, perhaps, to embrace a model that respects both nature and the environment. The forgotten luxury of medieval wild game holds lessons for the modern world, lessons about resilience, sustainability, and the importance of reconnecting with the natural systems that once sustained us.
The intricacies of medieval bread. When we think of bread today, it's easy to picture uniform, fluffy loaves from the supermarket shelf, mass-produced with little regard for flavor or nutrition. But in medieval times, bread was far more than a simple carbohydrate. It was a cornerstone of survival. The variety of breads made in medieval kitchens was astounding, far richer in texture and flavor than the processed loaves we consume now. From dense, coarse rye and barley loaves to darker, heartier breads made from a mix of grains, medieval bread was tailored to the local environment and its resources. These loaves were far from bland. They were packed with the nutrients and flavors that come from freshly milled, locally sourced grains. But the bread of the past was not just a food, it was a symbol of survival and cultural identity. Medieval people didn't just bake bread, they cultivated the very grains that would nourish them throughout the seasons. Barley, oats, and rye were grown in the local fields, and the process of grinding the grain was often done by hand, in community mills where the whole village would gather to make their bread. Bread, in this sense, wasn't simply bought or eaten. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, deeply connected to the cycles of nature and human labor. Contrast this with today's world, where bread has become a mass-produced, nutritionally deficient product, often made with refined flour and chemical additives. The breads we consume are distant from the hearty loaves of the past, stripped of nutrients, texture, and soul. The convenience of modern bread comes at a cost, a loss of the ancestral knowledge of how to craft bread from grains that sustain both the body and spirit. Reclaiming the art of medieval bread-making invites us to reconnect with that rich heritage. It's a call to return to locally sourced, whole grains, foods that nourish us not just physically, but emotionally, grounding us in the legacy of our ancestors. In an age of processed convenience, rediscovering the complexity of bread can empower us to reconnect with the wisdom of the past.
The forgotten preservation. In medieval times, survival wasn't just about gathering food, it was about ensuring that food would last. Preservation methods like pickling and fermenting were essential to surviving harsh winters when fresh produce was scarce and long periods without harvests could spell disaster. Unlike today's reliance on refrigeration, medieval people relied on nature's own techniques to keep food edible, from tangy fermented sauerkraut to jars of pickled mushrooms. Medieval kitchens were filled with the pungent aromas of preserved foods that would keep their nutritional value intact for months or even years. Fermentation was not only a practical solution for extending the shelf life of food, but it also added depth and complexity to flavors. The fermentation process would transform simple vegetables into probiotic-rich foods, adding health benefits that were crucial in times when medical knowledge was limited. Sauerkraut, for example, wasn't just a side dish, it was a lifesaver, preserving the vitamin C necessary to ward off scurvy during the long, cold months. Similarly, fermented dairy products like kefir and yogurt provided essential nutrients that sustained families through lean times. The fermentation process also improved digestibility, making these foods an integral part of medieval diets. Today, we face a world where food often spoils within days, and reliance on refrigeration has become second nature. Modern preservation methods, chemical additives, refrigeration, and even freezing have displaced the need for pickling and fermenting. However, these systems have a hidden cost: the loss of flavor, nutritional value, and an enduring connection to natural preservation methods. As we confront increasing concerns about food waste, sustainability, and environmental impact, looking back to the ancient wisdom of fermentation and pickling offers a powerful lesson. These methods, once essential for survival, are now a reminder of resilience, ingenuity, and the resourcefulness of our ancestors. Rediscovering these age-old techniques might just be the key to building a more sustainable and self-sufficient future. Medieval cheese, more than just dairy. In medieval Europe, cheese was far more than just a dietary staple. It was a cornerstone of both survival and cultural identity. The cheeses produced during this time were as varied as the regions from which they came, each representing not just a source of nutrition, but also a way of life, from the hard, crumbly Parmesan of Italy to the creamy, soft cheeses of the British Isles. Medieval cheeses were crafted with care, using age-old techniques passed down through generations. They were often made from the milk of cows, goats, and sheep,
and their production was tied to local traditions and the rhythms of agrarian life. Cheese was not only an important foodstuff, it was also a valuable commodity for trade. The aging process, which allowed cheeses to be stored for long periods, made them perfect for both local consumption and long-distance exchange. Traders and farmers alike relied on cheese to feed their communities and support their economies. Hard cheeses like Parmesan could be stored for months or even years, providing a source of nutrition during lean times and throughout the long winters when fresh milk was hard to come by. Cheese wasn't just food. It was a form of currency, a symbol of resourcefulness, and a reflection of the skill and knowledge of the people who made it. Today, the mass production of cheese has largely stripped away the craftsmanship and diversity that defined medieval cheeses. Modern cheeses are often produced in industrialized settings, standardized to meet the demands of a global market. The local, handcrafted cheeses of the past have been replaced by uniform, processed varieties that lack the depth of flavor and connection to place that once defined cheese as a cultural heritage. By looking back to the cheeses of the medieval world, we are reminded of a time when food was a direct reflection of the land and people who produced it. These cheeses were not just dairy. They were a part of a larger story of survival, community, and legacy. Reclaiming the craft of cheesemaking today could help us reconnect with a more sustainable, culturally rich approach to food, and honor the ancient knowledge that once kept entire communities nourished and thriving. The role of spices and herbs in survival. In the medieval world, spices and herbs were far more than mere flavor enhancers. They were vital tools for survival. In an age before refrigeration and synthetic preservatives, herbs like thyme, rosemary, and sage, along with spices such as cloves and cinnamon, played a critical role in preserving food and promoting health. These natural agents helped extend the shelf life of meat and vegetables, preventing spoilage in an era where food could rot within days. Spices were also used to mask the taste of food that had begun to deteriorate, making them indispensable in a time where freshness couldn't be taken for granted. But the use of herbs and spices in medieval cooking went beyond preservation. Many of these plants held medicinal properties that were integral to health. Garlic, for instance, was renowned for its ability to fight infections, while ginger and pepper were used to aid digestion and treat ailments. Medieval healers understood the power of these plants to treat a wide array of illnesses, from stomach issues to respiratory infections, and their wisdom was passed down through generations. In a time when modern medicine was still in its infancy, the knowledge of these plants was a life-saving resource. Contrast this with today's diets, where herbs and spices often serve as little more than a decorative touch to a dish. The modern food system has largely stripped away the richness and depth that these natural ingredients once provided. In our reliance on processed foods and chemical preservatives, we've lost the connection to the healing properties of nature's bounty. The convenience of packaged, flavorless meals leaves little room for the health benefits that once came from fresh, locally sourced herbs and spices. Reclaiming the use of spices and herbs in our daily lives holds the potential to revitalize our health and resilience. By embracing the ancient wisdom of these natural remedies, we can build a diet that nourishes both the body and the spirit, reconnecting with the resourceful practices that helped medieval peoples survive and thrive. Reclaiming the ancient feast. As we reflect on the forgotten foods and techniques of the medieval world, we realize that these ancient practices hold more than just historical value. They offer us a path forward. The self-sufficiency, resilience, and deep connection to nature that defined medieval food systems are lessons that have been lost in our modern, convenience-driven culture. Yet, by revisiting these methods, whether it's foraging, fermenting, or even hunting wild game, we can reclaim a sense of empowerment that comes from knowing how to nourish ourselves in a sustainable way. Incorporating these practices into our own lives can do more than just improve our diets. It can reconnect us to the land and the legacy of our ancestors. It can instill a respect for nature's rhythms and a deeper understanding of the value of food, not as a commodity, but as a life-giving resource. The modern world may be far removed from medieval kitchens, but the wisdom of those who survived off the land is still relevant. The time to embrace these ancient methods is now, as we face the challenges of sustainability, food insecurity, and environmental degradation. By turning back to the basics, we can begin a journey towards self-sufficiency that honors the past and builds a more resilient future for generations to come.